I know that there's many people that are still fighting for immigration reform, many immigrant communities that have hope that one day they can come out of the shadows and have access to a green card and a pathway to citizenship. The one thing I will never forget is how my mother would always remind me and my sister of the importance of having to go to school so that we wouldn't end up cleaning houses the way that she did.
What's going on? Welcome back to the FYI Podcast. It's your host, Paul Tully. I'm here today with Luz Castro. She's a policy advocate. She's from Bell Gardens, California, and she's going to tell us all about her incredible journey, how she found her inspiration in what she does, and how she followed it. This is the FYI Podcast. Let's get into it. Luz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. It's an honor. I'm so excited. You're doing such incredible things. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and that kind of stuff.
Yes, of course. And again, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about my experience. As you mentioned, I grew up in the city of Bell Gardens in Southeast Los Angeles. I grew up in a single parent household. My mom was undocumented for over 25 years of her life, and she was a domestic worker. And early on, I saw how hard she worked, cleaning houses to ensure that me and my younger sister had enough food at the table and a roof over our heads. And it's really been her who has inspired me to pursue a career in public service. So early on, when I was in high school, when I went into college, I knew that I wanted to study political science and Spanish. Yeah. I wanted to understand how government processes worked, and I wanted to help people the way that I wish my family would have been helped. I did several internships while I was in school. So I worked or interned in congressional offices. I worked in two. I also interned in Washington, D.C. I studied abroad. I supported the cafeteria workers at Whittier College with their union. So I did a lot of labor organizing. I did a lot of policy and community engagement work. And when I graduated from Whittier College, I was fortunate enough to land a job with my very own member of Congress, who is, or was, Congresswoman Lucille Roybal Allard. And I was there for a couple of years as a field deputy overseeing her Southeast LA region, covering her education, labor, census portfolio, as well as environment. So I was able to meet with several people from the community that I grew up in. And after that, I did some work on the 2020 census and making sure that Latinos were counted in this important time, important census, and making sure that we got the federal funds that we needed back to the community. After that, I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. It was right after the elections, and there was this new opportunity to, in my belief, pass some sort of immigration reform. And my mother at that time was still undocumented, so to me it was important to have a seat at the table and make sure that the voices of those like my mother were being represented in Washington, D.C. So I moved from Bell Gardens all the way to Washington, D.C., and I was a policy advocate there for nearly 3 years, so I would be in and out of the White House, of Capitol Hill, work with other nonprofit organizations in making sure that the voices of immigrants were being included in the legislative process. So that was a very, inspiring moment for me, because I saw how difficult it is to pass policy at the federal level. However, I do appreciate all of the opportunities that I had to really represent the voices of immigrants in the halls of Congress. Currently, right now, I'm working at another local nonprofit here in Boyle Heights and doing similar to what I did in Washington, D.C., but more at the local and state level. And I'm really focusing on making sure, again, that the voices of immigrants are included in City Hall, in the LA County office, at the state capitol, and whatnot.
Wow, that's incredible. Before I even jump in, what was it like going in and out of the White House? That must have been I've seen it from outside, but I mean, it must have been such a powerful feeling to go into the White House, huh?
It was, and I never thought that I would have had the privilege to be able to take meetings with White House officials to discuss a variety of policies, particularly those on immigration, right? And I also, as part of my job, had the opportunity to create access or create entry points for other immigrant communities and making sure that they also had access to the White House. So part of my job, I was also able to secure some meetings for those that were impacted by the outdated immigration system to provide testimonies to White House officials so that they could really understand, what it means, what it feels like to be undocumented in this country.
So I want to jump into your experiences. So your mother came over undocumented. Sound like she was is an incredible woman and worked really hard for you to get a platform. When was the moment that you knew you wanted to dedicate your life to advocating for undocumented people and newly arriving immigrants?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think there were several moments in my lifespan, or at least when I was younger, that I saw how hard my mom would work, right? She would wake up at 6 in the morning to catch her bus to go to work. She worked in different cities throughout LA County, whether it was Whittier, Downey, La Mirada, Santa Fe Springs, and I saw how hard she worked every single day, multiple hours for low wages. And I knew that, I wanted to do something. I wanted to help people like her who were being exploited at the workplace for their labor because they were undocumented in this country. Wow. So is there a specific situation you could share with us that really impacted you, whether positive or negative, that was, I don't think I can think of a specific point, but the one thing I will never forget is how my mother would always remind me and my sister of the importance of having to go to school so that we wouldn't end up cleaning houses the way that she did. And for her, education was everything in this country. And in her eyes, right, and in our family, education was an entry point for us to have a better life.
Wow. No, that's powerful. So she was a strong advocate of...
Yeah.
It's always interesting when you hear, my grandmother also came over from Italy, and she was also such a strong advocate for hard work in America and the opportunities that are presented. Even, it seems like immigrants almost have a different perspective on what the opportunities that are provided here. Was she an advocate of that, or was she more did she feel that the work she was doing, did she feel exploited, or did she feel like these are still great opportunities that I have for my child to be able to do better?
No,
what was her perspective?
Yeah, no, she was grateful. I think having had come from Mexico, where there weren't that many opportunities for her to pursue a full-on career, for her, being in the United States and having a job as a domestic worker was the American dream.
Wow.
And, for her, like you mentioned, hard work is important. And I think that's something, a skill, I would say, that I've carried out throughout my whole career.
So you graduate high school, you go to Whittier College.
Yes.
Great school. What was it like there? Is that where you started? Did you already know you wanted to work as an advocate, or in high school, or was it college that it happened more, or you went into college knowing this is what I want to do?
When I went into college is when I really started to get more involved doing labor organizing, right? Speaking with a lot of the cafeteria workers that were then working at Whittier College and discussing with them some of the issues that they were having as workers, right? And as union workers, right? Yeah. And then I also did a lot of work on environmental justice in the community that I grew up in. There are a lot of environmental issues with a lot of factories being around the communities and a lot of community members being directly impacted by these factories that are polluting a lot of the air, that are polluting a lot of the environments that we grew up in. So that's when I started to really learn about the different issues that were directly impacting a lot of folks from my community. And I didn't realize that when I was in high school, because to me, living in Bell Gardens and living in those types of circumstances, I'm not saying that they were bad or horrible, right? But they could have been better.
Yeah.
And to me, going to Whittier College and leaving and learning about what other folks have experienced, their background, I started to notice how different lives were and how different access was for everybody that I went to school with. Like
specifically saying people of higher economical class, what do you mean specifically?
That would be I think that's something that's accurate, right? And something that I can reference to is, for example, going to college. I never studied or had a tutor to study for the SAT or the ACT, which were both tests that were required to get into college, right? However, other folks that I went to college with had mentioned that they had studied for 3 or 4 months, had tutors that helped them, but to me, that wasn't something that was accessible to me.
Interesting. Right. Yeah, that's something I mean, that I never would have thought about either. You're right. Like, somebody coming from maybe richer community, right? They have like tutors setting them up. It's almost like they have all, and it's funny because it's like, I don't know if that's like unfair. It's great that they have those resources. And I think what you're doing is bringing those resources and the idea of them to another community. So it's just educating, like you just educated me. I would have never actually thought of that. Like, you're right. People have tutors getting them ready for the test, where I'm over here like, I need to study harder. And it's
I wouldn't say call it unfair, right? I don't think that, I like to think of it that way. I think it's more of a not having access to a lot of the resources that a lot of the families in different communities need, right? And I don't think everybody needs the same resources, but I think having access or having a person have access to those resources is important, and making sure that they're set up for success. And whatever they're pursuing, whether it's college, whether it's, having their first job, something that I can mention is that I didn't know what a resume was. I didn't know what it was like to interview for a job that was more formal, because my mom never had any of those jobs. My mom never had to formally interview for a job. And these were different things that I had to learn along the way. And I wish I had access to different services that would have supported me to set me up for success for different types of vocations in my career.
Right. After college, you go off to Washington.
No, so I worked for, not yet, almost. So after college, I worked for my member of Congress. So the way that it works is that members of Congress have an office in Washington, D.C., so in the U.S. Capitol, but they also have a district office. And I worked out of the district office, which was actually located not so far away from my home in the City of Commerce. So I worked from the field office.
Nice. Okay, and what'd you do there?
So as a field deputy for the Congresswoman, what I would do is that I would stay up to date with everything that was happening at the local level in the cities that she represented. And I would have to update her. So if there were politics that were happening, if a factory was closing down, if a new business was opening, or if there was a specific stakeholder that wanted to have a meeting with the Congresswoman and she wasn't able to be at that meeting, I would take that meeting for her. So I was her eyes and ears for whenever she wasn't able to be in the district. And whenever she was in the district, I would staff her. So I would, take her to different events where she had public speaking engagements, where she would do tours, where she would get to meet with the community. I would go with her and make sure that she was up to speed on what organization she was meeting with, provide her recommendations on what organizations she should also meet with. So it was a lot of different community engagement activities. So
you're working as in policy. So for layman's term, that's saying, for example, give me a real life scenario of something you worked on to affect policy and get a change.
When I worked at a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., I did a lot of policy work at the federal level. So I would monitor different policies that were moving as it relates to immigration, whether it was policies for asylum seekers, policies for undocumented immigrants in this country. And one of the major bills that I had the privilege of working on was a bill that would provide a pathway to citizenship to the 11 million undocumented people in this country. So that entailed doing a lot of research, collaborating with a lot of partners, a lot of attorneys, a lot of immigration experts that had expertise on this specific issue. In addition to that, it also entailed doing a lot of outreach to Hill staff that worked for a member of Congress and making sure that we had a bill that was representative of the communities that we represented. So at the organization that I was with, I worked at an organization that was a membership based, which meant that the members were immigrants that were directly impacted by the immigration system. So the way that we pushed forward legislation or the way that we pushed forward policy was by consulting the members who understood what it meant like to live in this country with this immigration system. So they were the ones that were really deciding and consulting us on what were the major issues that they were having to deal with. And one of the major ones has always been access to a green card. The last time that we had an immigration reform was in 1986 with then President Ronald Reagan. And we haven't had any immigration reform since then. And what I was doing with other organizations was making sure that Congress did something to update that immigration system and make the immigration system accessible to different immigrants that have been living in this country for 30 years, 40 years without any pathway to citizenship. That 1986 policy really allowed for many undocumented immigrants to apply for a green card and apply and have access to a pathway to citizenship. So right now we haven't had any of that.
Wow, so long.
And there's been several attempts by senators, by House of Representatives, and trying to prioritize a pathway to citizenship, but it just hasn't been successful. The support from both sides of the aisle just isn't there at this point. And I know that there's many people that are still fighting for immigration reform, many immigrant communities that have hope that one day they can come out of the shadows and have access to a green card and a pathway to citizenship.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a polarizing issue now, especially in the country and with everything that's been going on. What exactly, without obviously veering off, but I know there's a lot of things going on, like in New York City. I've been seeing on the news, like with the migrant situations, and at least the news portrays it as like incredibly overwhelming, the amount of people that are coming in and being bussed around. You're also talking about the people who have been here, not even just the new people that are arriving daily.
And that kind of just shows how outdated this immigration system is, right? Not only for those that have been in this country, but also those that are trying to seek asylum in this country. And, in the US, seeking asylum is a right, and this is something that asylum seekers should have access to. But because of the immigration system, it's been difficult for them to really navigate the US immigration system in general. And interesting that you mentioned the New York buses, because we've also been getting a lot of buses here in LA. I think we've had maybe 10, I think we may be at 12 buses that were bused in from, most of them from Texas, from the governor there. So it's just very complicated, the immigration and the politics that is currently happening in this country.
Is there a way to get the 11 million that are already here, which is already an incredible number, that there's 11 million undocumented people here that should get their citizenship? They're already contributing. How do we get them green cards, but also take on the amount of migrants that are seeking asylum, and also handle that? Is there a possible way to do all this financially organized, or is it? Because to me, it seems like it's so big. I don't know.
That's exactly what I've been doing, I think, these past 3 years, specifically lobbying and advocating for undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general that, like you said, are living in this country, who have settled roots, who have been here for 30 years, 40 years, more than what I've been alive. So I do think that there are several policies that currently exist that could potentially help many immigrants in this country, and also help those that are seeking asylum, right? I think California has always been a welcoming state for migrants, and I think we can do both. I think we can continue welcoming migrants that need the help, right? And we can also help those that have been in this country for many, many years. And there's actually a specific policy that I do want to highlight, because I do think it's a simple policy, and that's the policy that I worked on, and it's called the Immigration Registry. If you go onto the USCIS website /registry, you'll find a website that says that there is an existing law that allows immigrants who have been in this country for certain years to apply for a green card. So the specific date right now is the year 1972. So according to this registry policy, anyone who has been in this country from 1972 or before can apply for a green card under the Immigration Registry. However, if you do the math, that means that a person must have been in this country for 30, 50 more than 50 years, right?
Wow.
So whoever, I think a lot of people who would have qualified for that under that policy already benefited from it, right? So one of my jobs and something that I did when I was in Washington, D.C. was advocate Congress, asking them to update that date of 1972 to something closer to the current present date, right? To allow more immigrants to have access to a green card. So it's a simple fix to the law. Registry is already in the law. All Congress has to do is update that year to something more current, to help those that have been in the U.S. for many, many years.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's one thing I'd like to ask about. There's a concept that immigrants that are here are taking from society, but that's not necessarily true. Isn't that correct that a lot of immigrants that are here are paying taxes and
Yes.
are working and they're actually contributing a lot of their pay back into our society?
Yes, and I would also add, I think everything you said is correct, and I would also add that a lot of immigrants in this country are also micro business owners. They're small business owners that have their own business, that want to contribute, and want to contribute even more than what they're contributing now, and having access to a green card would support them.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for viewers, but I would imagine that most of us out there, I'm speaking even as a U.S. veteran myself, most of us out there want to see people do well and want to see people come and flourish in America and contribute to our society. It's tough. It's like, for me, I feel like politics are very much like being in a gang, it's like, or being like on a rival team. It's very much like, sometimes it's like, even when you know you're wrong, you're like, we're right, because it's very hard I'd like to see more people that could come to the middle of the aisle and say, you know what, this is not right, and this is not what we support. But I'd like to believe that the majority of us here want everybody to flourish. Hopefully we can find a way and a system to make this process a lot less painless. I think 40 years is a long time since having reform done. So that's a little bit, that's alarming to hear. I didn't even know that. So it's like 1986 was a long time ago. So hopefully we can find someone. You mentioned street vendors.
Yes.
I want to bring something up about that. Living here in LA, we see a huge uprising in abuse to street vendors. I don't know what this is, but it's like on the news constantly on social media, like street vendors being violated and abused. And it's like, some of the street vendors that I've seen are very hardworking people. And is that something, because you mentioned street vendors, is that something you guys are working on, like advocating for?
And there's definitely a lot of policies that have decriminalized street vending, right? So street vendors here in LA and California, they should be able to street vend, right? And I think when it comes to street vendors, a lot of them, this is the only job that they have. And they are relying on this job to support their families, their kids. And, as an organization, what we're doing is making sure that these street vendors that are vending, that are being criminalized, right, that they know their rights, right? I think that's the biggest issue, making sure that street vendors know about the policies that a lot of advocates have been fighting for. And I think a lot of the issue sometimes is that policies become law, but policies don't reach the people that it's actually impacting, right? So a huge part of our role at where I'm working at is making sure that street vendors understand what are the policies and what are the implications. How are these policies benefiting them? How are these policies impacting them, and making sure that they understand them. And I think in general, I think that's a huge issue, because I truly believe that a policy isn't one until it's benefiting a person, right? And it's unfortunate that a lot of folks, I think a lot of folks in general don't follow policy, don't follow politics, don't follow the news, don't follow the bill numbers, right? And I think it's natural for them to not know that these policies have become law, but I think it's also the responsibility of a lot of organizations, or not necessarily the responsibility, but I think a lot of organizations are really putting in the effort and making sure that the people understand what these policies mean, because policy is very complex.
Yeah. It seems like too, like from the moment of getting something done, it's just such a long process. I feel like, especially living in a time now of everybody wants things so fast, and getting something approved and changed is an incredibly long process.
A lot of policies can take up many years. I mean, at the federal level would be, I think, the longest wait time, in my opinion, at least on immigration. And then I think at the city and state level, I think there's more windows of opportunity to speed up those policies and make them law. And I think I've seen a lot of policy advocates do just that, and making sure that immigrants are included in the different legislative processes that the state is carrying out, that City Hall is carrying out, that LA County is carrying out. So there's windows of opportunities, but I do think, in general, it's just very complex, complicated for folks to understand, especially, right, if all they're thinking about is making enough food, making enough money to bring food to the table.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. Real quick on the street vendors. So, just to be clear for the audience, because it's something, again, I wasn't aware of. You see street vendors and you think, I could understand in the beginning, sometimes businesses would get a little frustrated, right? Somebody opens a restaurant, they invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, marketing, and then a street vendor pulls up in front and sets up, and it's like, hey buddy, I put in a lot of money, and I have a lease and a mortgage and a family to feed. You're literally illegally selling food. But what you're saying is it's not illegal. They're legally able to do that. So the issue shouldn't be with the street vendors if somebody out there is in that particular situation. It's the street vendors who are doing what they're allowed to do, is what you're saying. So that's important to know.
And at least in LA County, and I'm not super familiar with throughout the state of California, right? But in LA County in particular, there's no vending zones, unfortunately, where there's a couple of high traffic zones. I think the Dodger Stadium is one of them, where vendors aren't allowed to vend, but for the majority of LA County, they are able.
So that's important, and that makes sense. So for people out there, it makes sense that if somebody has the right to vend there, then they're allowed to. And if they're illegally doing it, then they shouldn't. And it's kind of like finding, because I do understand, at least from where I'm sitting, both sides. If it's very difficult to open a business, right? So let's say your mother opens a business and does all the work to get her restaurant off the ground, and then you got 15 vendors and standing outside selling foods, and you're like, hey man,
that's where it gets complicated.
It's complicated but if they're legally doing it, then they're legally doing it. My question is, if they're illegally doing it, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's complicated, not trying to go into the politics of this, but I think, right, street vendors are, like I said, that this is what they rely on. They want to start a business, and it's not that they're not trying to do this through the quote unquote legal means, right? I think sometimes the systems that are in place don't allow them to open up their own small business, right? And so I think it's a very much institutional problem where a lot of our community members don't have access to government services, don't understand how to navigate, don't understand how to open a small business. I wouldn't be able, at least not right now, be able to open my own small business, I wouldn't know how to navigate that, right? So I can't even imagine somebody who may be a monolingual Spanish speaker trying to get all these permits, trying to, you know, open up a lease or buy a property. So I think there's just a lot of issues that prevent a lot of street vendors from opening up a small business.
Yeah.
But I do get your point of, you know, I think that's something that has come up where it's a competitive world, right?
Absolutely.
We live in a capitalist world, and I think there's just a lot of issues.
And I think that, listen, again, I want to see everybody flourish and everybody do things, but they have to do it the right way. That's where I stand. And if they're illegally doing it, then they're wrong. Bottom line. And that goes for both sides. I think it's important that you're advocating and you're educating people. And that's where, to me, the conversation works, is that if you want to devote your life to nonprofit and to educating immigrants and people who are in less fortunate positions, that's great. Educate them. Help them get that LLC. Help them learn to navigate. If they're breaking the law, they're breaking the law. And that goes for both. That goes for the guy who goes up and tips over their stand. That's what I'm saying. I support those people being brought up on charges too. That's assault. You don't go tip over a vendor stand, because even if they're there illegally. But on the flip side, we can't have illegal activity happening on either side. Just where I feel, but we could agree to disagree. Absolutely.
We can agree to disagree.
Absolutely. So, listen, I think it's incredibly important what you're doing. I tip my hat to you for being out there and affecting change. Working in the nonprofit sector, it's not about money, obviously. You spend a lot of money to get an education to potentially maybe not make a lot of money, but what you're doing is you're affecting change. And I think that is a lot more valuable than money. So I commend you for that. In closing, if you can, talk to our audience, look at the camera, give them a little bit of rundown on somebody out there that's very interested, that's relating with you, that everything you're doing is sparking an interest in them. How can they begin the process? Of any age, but specifically I like to aim for that kid that's in college, that's kind of getting ready to explore their options in the world. How do they get involved in what you're doing and lead a life like you're leading?
Yes, of course. Happy to chat about it. And I think the first thing that I will say is sign up for internships. Look for internships. Try to explore now early on, what are your passions? What is it that sparks the light inside of you, and start getting into those spaces so that you get to learn what a day-to-day looks like for an attorney, for a policy advocate, for an elected official, whatever your aspirations are. Internships are really much an entry point for you to get some work experience before you graduate college. And I think right now we've entered this new era where internships are now actually paid, or at least for the most part, many are paid. When I was in school, a lot of the internships that I conducted were free, were community service hours that I was doing. And I think now there's these opportunities to really, get paid to do these internships. And these internships are really much gonna help you for when you graduate college, because these internships are work experience that you can speak on when you interview for a full-time job. And I would also say that, don't be afraid to always ask for help. Don't be afraid to go to your college's career center, cultural center, or whatever centers you are working with in your own college, because there are resources there. Another thing that I will say is, when you interview, for me, when I was interviewing, it was my first time doing an interview and I didn't know what to expect. Do your research, ask somebody who has gone through the interview process, find a mentor. A mentor is always there to help you and to support you. And the last thing that I'll say is always bring someone with you, right? If somebody else helped you, whether it was a mentor, a friend who helped you get a job, who helped you prep for this interview, make sure that you pass it forward.
Beautiful. I want to thank you, Luz, for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's so inspiring, so informative. And Listen, everybody out there watching, I hope you got something from today's episode. We're sitting with Luz Castro. I know I got something, a valuable set of information that I got, that you find your passion, you find something that you feel is important out there in the world. For Luz, it happened to be watching her mother work hard and endless hours and sacrifice everything she could for Luz to have a better life. She came to this country with nothing and she built something, and now she has a daughter out there who has actually worked in the White House. How cool is that? How inspiring is that? To me, that's very inspiring. Anything is possible, not just in America, but in the world. Everything takes hard work. I learned that today. You could sit down with people, sit down, talk, communicate. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. Doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. If we don't have dialogue and we don't have conversation, we're never going to learn from each other. Let's always be open to learn from each other, to talk, and to make our society a prosperous place for all of us. All right. I love you all. You know how we do it. FYI, finding your inspiration, where we find it and we follow it. See you on the next one.
You should never stress about the problems you be facing. Everybody in the mud on the struggle trying to make it. Look into the mirror and you see the motivation. Then you step into the world and you find your inspiration. I'm finding inspiration, and once I get a hold of it, I'll never get complacent. Look into the mirror and you see the motivation. Then you step into the world and you find your inspiration.